Communications Conference. Thank you for joining us. I want to introduce a couple people that I'm really excited to hear from our campus. One of my favorite teachers here on campus is Ms. Linda Seppa Salisbury, a wonderful educator and consultant in communications. You guys know her. The second here is our former police chief, Roger Bragdon, who is now, and I'm going to get this right because I wrote it down, the security management analyst for our security here at SCC. Please welcome her.
Well, good morning. We are absolutely delighted to be here this morning and welcome you to Gender Communication Tips for Men and for Women in the Workplace. How many of you are currently working in a workplace somewhere? You have a job at the moment? Raise your hand if you will have a job. Come on, SEC students, get those hands up. And we are going to introduce ourselves very briefly to you. My name is Linda Seppa Salisbury, as Chris said.
I'm Roger Bragdon.
And our goal for today is to deal specifically with workplace and gender communication issues. So before we get started, it's kind of a practice in some of our classes. I'd like you to get up, please, and introduce yourself and say good morning to at least 2 people. So get up and do it. Not just your own gender, find another gender to say good morning So now you should have a packet where you're sitting. If you don't have one, there should be one near you. And that should have, many of you have a brochure so you can see what's going on here today and also the 10:30 hour. And also there's some material in that packet that will help you when it comes to gender communication. And there's a gender communication Quizlet in there, which you feel free to take on your own time. Do not look at the answers so that you think you're doing it right. Just take it just as you would know it. If you're coming on in, feel free to come in and sit down. We'd love to have you. We want to give you a brief description of our workplace history, because if we're talking about gender communication at work, it makes sense for you to know a little bit about our work environments that we have been in and a little bit about our history. So we'll start with Roger Bragdon. Would you give him another round of applause here?
Just doing that. I was on the police department for 33 years. I started as a patrol officer in 1973 and ended up as chief in 2006. Sandy Brewer was the first police officer that we hired in the 70s, and one night I got to ride with her, and there's more on that later. I was also the training sergeant at the academy when we hired several women at the same time who went to the police academy, and I'll talk about my experiences there. I was also a shift commander. A shift commander is the person in charge of the entire shift of officers, and I was the shift commander, the lieutenant, when all of those women that we had hired made probation and by their seniority went to my shift at the same time.
And you're still here.
Still here. As the chief, by the time I made chief, we had worked through many, many problems, but there was other issues, which I'll talk about. In addition to being a police officer in the city of Spokane, I worked as a contract instructor for the Department of Justice in the areas of intelligence operations and anti-terrorism. I've done that for 15 years. I was asked by Gary Livingston to review the emergency management plan for community college Spokane, which I knew was a trick. That was 5 years ago. It was supposed to be a 3-month job. I also also work in the summertime for the National Forest Service. It's kind of a hobby. I needed people to enforce the rules and regulations in the forest. And as I got there, to no surprise to me, 20 to 30% of the people who work in the Forest Service are women, especially in the higher ranks. I've had all those experiences.
Can you hear in the back? I don't know if yours is on. We didn't trick you with that either.
Okay, how about this?
Is that better? Can you hear it? Yeah.
LOL.
That's thank you. Want me to do that? Well, I'm Linda Seppa Salisbury, as I said, and I am 47 years into being an educator. And 36 of those have been here at my career home at Spokane Community College, and I love what I do absolutely every single day. I also started 35 years ago my own communication and business consulting company. So for all of this time, I have had 2 jobs. And how I got to know Roger Bragdon was that I did some consulting a long time ago with the Spokane Police Department. And he stood out as someone who had wonderful communication skills, and even more than that, was open to learn. And so when I looked at who would be somebody that could talk and be articulate about these things and also be very honest about what he's working on and what I'm also working on with gender communication, asked him if he would please come and help us out. So I'm so grateful that you said yes. I also, as part of being a consultant and also working here and also having male and female students in class, I'm a student of gender communication. It is still, this many years later, a mystery to me. And I know that your keynote speaker talked about that men and women are more similar than they are different, and I agree with that. But I'm here to tell you, after as many years as I've been on the planet, I think there are some profound differences as well. So raise your hand if you think there's some differences between men and women. Okay then. We love that. We love that.
I've been married for 41 years. There's differences.
And speaking of that, I was just saying to Roger, it's okay to say nice things about men and women. It's that some of my favorite men are here this morning. They all have gray hair. So I want to introduce 2 of them to you that they're just amazing, amazing people. You have gray hair, you would be one of those. But it goes without saying that if you want to know a man of heart, you need to know Father Bob Schlim. So let's give him a round of applause. He has worked here all this time. He stands up well for men and he's a good listener. And this is, I hope I can get through this without crying. For all the time I've been here, we've done these conferences. My beloved husband Bert's been here except in the fall. And he's back. And he is the person who healed my heart about men. And we've been married a long, long time. Not as long as you've been long. And so please welcome Bert, if you would, please. And we work on this stuff every day, even though some of the skills are personally based in others. So we want to talk about our goals. And first of all, we're going to give you a little bit of history about gender communication in the workplace, and are there really problems? Is there a history of problems? Are there still problems today? And you have a lot to say about that. We're also going to be talking about some of the typical male and female differences. Also talk about some similarities, but we're also going to talk about the differences. We want to present some tools to you that you could use in the workplace today. And so that's another goal that we have. We also want to have a really respectful conversation. And that is that in what we say and what you say to each other, that we learn to be kind and nice because kindness matters, and how we talk about each gender, because each gender has a lot to contribute to this culture today. And so that's really what our norms are all about. The other thing is that even though we're talking about men and women, we're really understanding that you cannot generalize about everyone. Not all men are the same, not all women are the same. And there's certainly a more masculine style of communication, and some of the times those are women who use that style. There's also a more feminine style of communication, and sometimes men have more of that style. So if we get down to understanding and know our own style, then we can also do better with coming in contact with other people's styles. So, in terms of the norms, we also want to give you a chance to ask some questions, so we'll save about 10 minutes towards the end of the hour. So, question number 1. If you're taking notes, we're going to do it in a question and answer format. You're first.
We often hear that in the past, women have not been treated fairly, that there isn't a fair playing field in that culture or the workplace, in our cultural workplace. If you are born a woman, do you believe that historically this was true? Is it still true in some ways today, and has it ever been true for you?
Yes, and yes. Warren Buffett recently, those of you taking notes might want to write this down, latest Fortune magazine, May 2013. Had a conversation about men and women in the workplace and the kind of communication issues that we have. And what he said is this country is never going to recover completely economically until every single person has access to putting their best talents to work at work. And he said that there is a factor that's gone on for a long time that women have not always been included in the conversation. And women, even though there are more women in the workplace today than there ever have been, and by 2020, there will be more women than men in the workplace, and there are more women running Bloomsday this year than men running Bloomsday, which just about blew Bert out of the water when he was running Bloomsday a while back. There are women running out there like, right honey, they run. But the bottom line of what he says is that women diminish themselves in the workplace. And that's part of what the problem is. It's not always that what someone does to us, it's often what we do to ourselves. So he interviewed someone by the name of Catherine Graham. You need to write down her name while you're Googling people. Google Catherine Graham, and Catherine Graham was the CEO of the Washington Post. Now when she became the CEO of the Washington Post, she had grown up with a father who gave her lots of messages about women and what they were not supposed to do. She had a husband who loved her dearly, but gave her lots of messages that women really didn't belong in the business world. And so when she became a CEO, she had lots of self-doubt. And according to Warren Buffett, that's one of the things that's holding women back. Women are very apologetic about what they do. A lot of times I'll see women in classes, women at work, start off answering a question by, this probably isn't right, but, and in my classes we stop and say, whoa, 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 whoa. So, Catherine Graham won a Pulitzer Prize. Catherine Graham increased the productivity of the Washington Post by 400%. And in a conversation with Warren Buffett, she said, I wonder if I'll ever be good enough. And he said, for heaven's sakes, Catherine, what would you have to do? And she said, those old messages sink in deep. They sink in deep. So you asked if I've ever been through that. Yeah, I have. And one of the first times I interviewed in Minnesota for a teaching job, line of us waiting to interview, and I said this to you at lunch, the very first question this principal asked me was, when was I going to have a baby?
They still do that.
I know. And I said, I have no idea. But did that set the tone for the whole interview? Like, you're already thinking I'm going to leave. And as much as I love my dad, and I was born with one large hand and one small hand, this is my lucky finding Nemo. And he was my booster and my, you can do anything you want to do, you just have to work hard. When I told him I was going to start a business, he said, you don't even know how to spell business. You can't be successful at business. Now, if I didn't have good self-esteem, those of you from my class, would I have maybe just said he was right? That I am a spunky little kid, and I said, just watch me. But a lot of times women don't do that. who runs the community colleges of Spokane are the classified people. In case nobody knows that, just if they were all gone on one day, we would just fall apart here. And I'm not being disrespectful to administrators or faculty, but who's there at the basis of everything is classified staff? Most of those people are women. And I often hear them say, nobody appreciates us, they don't know what we do, and I'm like, no, they don't. So I do think it's a problem still, where I agree with Warren Buffett, and I have had it happen to me, and it ticks me off just a little bit.
No kidding. What, since you're talking about Warren Buffett?
Yes.
One of the most recent things you just said in the last 3 or 4 days is that when you go to the workplace, you have to have a passion for what you do.
Yes.
And having been in the law enforcement field, you really can't be an officer unless you have a passion for that. It's a very hard, complex job. But my wife's been an educator for 30-something years. She retired. But watching her, my son coaches at the college level. He's a head coach of women's basketball at the college level. My daughter is a health and PE instructor at Bellevue School District. They each have 2 kids, and they have a passion for what they do. When I watch them, I see their passion. When I started working here, I was about the only cops had that kind of passion, had that kind of drive for their job. But educators, I did a workshop with classified just the other day. The passion at CCS is incredible. And so Warren Buffett had to come here and see what it looks like. But it also plays into what we're talking about today.
Yes, it does.
Well, do you want me to start?
Okay, I was going to ask you a question.
Go, yes.
All right, so the question is, you have a long and distinguished career in law enforcement. I think everybody would agree with that, and that's primarily been a male-dominated field. But when I first got to know you, and you kind of alluded to this when you introduced yourself, you were there at the beginning. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about Sandra Brewer and how you navigated communication in your workplace?
Sure. The other thing you have to know as I'm speaking is that I learn everything the hard way. That's just my reputation. I have to experience it, do it wrong, and learn from it. And an observer of human nature. So Sandy Brewer came out of the department in the 70s, and we had a civil service classification called police woman. In fact, we had one in my academy class. They don't go to patrol. They don't do the same as that training. They go straight to the detectives, usually in drunk spirit. The person who was going to be in our class was the last one ever hired. Then everybody was a police officer. Sandy Brewer was hired as a police officer, meaning she had to go to the police academy, go through all the training, and come to shift. She came in as a rookie. You rotate through the shift during the training year. One night, we all had regular partners in those days. But my partner was sick, her partner was sick, her coach was sick. And the sergeant said, "You got it." Which, he didn't say that in a nice way. So we're driving around, and I was trained to be a gentleman by my mother. So I was polite, and I answered her questions, and I knew that it wasn't my problem, it was the department's problem. And I gave no thought whatsoever to her being a woman police officer, the only one hired. It was only her. And I think you heard the speaker this morning talk about an environment where you're the only one. So right off the bat, there's a problem. Now, I didn't have that thought that night. I was controlling that. I was also a sucker. I was about as macho, as male-oriented as you could get. She's driving my car. The shift's going pretty good. She gets a call to see the shift manager. And the lieutenant of the shift wanted to talk to her. So I park in the lot. She goes in. She comes out. She's crying. And Sandy Brewer is not a problem. But she's crying. I says, "What's the problem?" You got to go back to work the rest of it. She says, "Well, they told me to cut my hair." I said, "Cut it to what?" Because her hair was fairly short. She says, "To the policy." I said, "We don't have a policy for you." She says, "Well, they said I have to conform to the present policy until they write a new one." And okay, so again, I was reminded I didn't care that much about her issues with hair and policy. But the justice person, he said, this is wrong. And so there's a light bulb. There's this, maybe you should come up out of being a cop and trying to look at the bigger picture. It's wrong. Somebody had talked to the lieutenant. He said, you really don't want to do this. I said, she's out there crying. You're giving her a stupid order. I don't know what are you trying to do? Well, he was trying to push you with the policy. Well, push it with the chief, not with Sandy Brewer. So he rescinded his order, and I finished my shift with her, and the rest is kind of history. She ended up suing the police department, and she didn't get all she deserved from that settlement. I can tell you. That order of the beer cut was just one of many, many, many things she had to do. Because she was the only one hired. We had done no preparation whatsoever in that police department to hire the first woman patrol officer. Zero. So the next thing happened to me, I'm a sergeant, and I'm with the police academy, and I'm a training sergeant. The training sergeant at the police academy is a lot like the resident advisor in your room. We shepherd all the cadets that are in the class, we monitor their progress, we help them with their problems. And in that class, on the classes that I monitored, were I think there were 7 or 8 women cadets. 6 of them from our department and 1 from the other department. And it was immediate. The men in the class are, oh man, are we going to have to change what we're doing? And all this and that. And so we never said anything. We had already talked about the training curriculum and decided that it was valid. It had been tested and tested. It was valid. And so we didn't change any of the training criteria. Police Academy, a lot of it's academic. You're going to learn law, you're going to learn evidence and things like that. And a lot of it is hands-on. So we're going to beat you up, you're going to drive fast. You have to shoot. You have to be practical. We have a lot of practical problems you have to work on. My observations, and I've been married for a while now, I've learned a little bit more about the female. And I've learned that, I see how good my wife is, so we'll give these women a chance. And since I was the shepherd, and it was my job to justice them. My observations, they were very strong, as a group, very strong in the academics. They forced us to change some of the curriculum in academics because being more detail-oriented than we were, asking more questions than we ever did. Because academics wasn't our strong suit. This gave me for men. We wanted to go shoot. They wanted to make sure that everything they were learning was precisely correct. They were very good. They were weaker in hands-on stuff, the shooting, the driving, the scenario problems, self-defense. But as you're watching the so-called weakness, as I was watching, self-defense class is brutal. They try to prepare you for what's going to happen on the street. And the self-defense instructors were no holds barred. And these women would go in there, get knocked down, get up, get knocked down, get back up. They would try everything to succeed at the self-defense class. And it was, you couldn't help but admire, it was like watching their passion. They were, what really jumped out at me was their passion to become a police officer. It wasn't, I think I will be a police officer. So they really wanted to be a police officer, a good one. And they were going to do it all. They asked for nothing in the police academy. They asked for no accommodation whatsoever. And in those days, there was only one uniform, and it was male-oriented. So, and it just, explanation. Over the years, we now have bulletproof vests for females. We have gun belts for females that flare out instead of straightening down like for men. Shirts and pants are all tailored more for the female body. But in those days, no, everything was made. Gun belts didn't fit. They always had a positive attitude, incredibly positive attitude. They weren't getting abused here because we didn't allow that. They were a cadet among the other cadets. And since I was a shepherd, that's the way it was. Everybody got treated the captain the same. There was no accommodation, but there was also an intolerance for anyone who was harassing another cadet. And that included instructors. The bottom line to the training days was their desire to be a police officer. It was obvious. They had that passion that I talked about earlier. And it was really something seeing. It was one of those light bulb things of, you know, if they got the passion, they could probably do this job. The next thing happened, now I'm a shift commander. I'm a lieutenant of the shift. And because I'm a new lieutenant, I get a grader, which I worked nearly my entire early career anyway, because I like it. That's all that way. The lieutenant of shifts, I have 3 platoons with about 12 people in each platoon. And they made probation. Remember, they've been doing rotation around shifts. And every single one of them made rotation, which we normally lose. In those days, we lost probably 30% of the class. We did not lose one single one. Give somebody their passion, their commitment to succeed. Again, no accommodation. And they, once they got to shifts, they endured harassment. They endured bad jokes and labels as they turned around those shifts. And in spite of that, we didn't lose a single one. So they come in my shift, they made probation, their seniority sends them all to grade with me. Immediately, the male contingent on graveyard, the people who chase people in the car, the fight workers who win bar fights, are going, this is ridiculous. This is not going to work. We had many times, that's good. I'm talking about her itself. We had all the rest of them, we were females. And men are going, this isn't going to work. And it was almost like, fold your arms, we're not going to work anymore. Now, that doesn't work in military style organization like the police department. Then the jokes started, and the labels started. Then it came time to what we call mark up, pick your partner that you're going to ride the car with. And of course, they've been a sport through their 10 days into training, they know each other, they want to ride together. And the guys are going, no way, you can't put 2 females in the car. They just won't be able to do the job. We'll have to follow them all around, and there became this, we have to protect them attitude. I went home and I talked to my advisor. And I said, I'm a new lieutenant. Now, by now I even have a reputation. I'm part, which we won't get into, but when I said something, I talked to my advisor and I said, okay, here's what's happening on the shift. And they said, these women out there, I think they can do the job. I watched them in the academy. They're good people, they have a passion. But they're on graveyard shift and nobody wants to work with them. It's getting worse and worse and worse. The entire shift is becoming a mess. And this is excuse me, this is the way my wife is. She says, well, you know, first she's listening, she's listening. Oh, really good.
A really good one.
and she goes, one question. She says, we were talking to our number. Was the process for them becoming an officer different than the men's? Light bulb. Not only exactly the same, they had to endure some harassment that the men never did. So I went back to shift. And on Friday night, all platoons are there. The entire shift has to be there on Friday night. And using my advisor's advice, I said, how many people here are wearing a police badge? Now, police officers don't answer questions. So you have to say things like, I need to see your hand if you're wearing a badge. They're used to inspection, so I think they thought I was going to inspect them. And they said, if you're wearing a badge, raise your hand. All the women officers are sitting in the back row.
Were their hands up?
No, because they learned, you know,
You don't do that?
officers never volunteer. Yeah. So until finally everybody had to raise their hands. And I said, okay, does your badge say Spokane Police Department? City of Spokane. Raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. Does anybody's badge in here say men officer? If you have a badge that says men officer, you need to raise your hand. Anybody in the back got one of those? I said, did everybody in this room graduate from the police academy? Did everybody in this room make probation? Is there anybody in this room that didn't make probation? So, from the show of hands, everybody in this room got hired, got trained, went through probation, and successfully became a fully commissioned police officer. That means we're all the same. And I will expect nothing less. And I disciplined a lot of police officers. for violating that rule. Because if you can't respect one another, you can't go in the street and respect the citizens. We still have problems. And let me just go quickly through a couple of the issues that occurred. The first one was Sergeant Stevens said the women officers want you to talk to the men because when they're handling a call, the male officer will show up and take over the call. And they said, they want me to talk to the men about that. And they said, yeah. I said, no, you don't. I said, if I go and talk to the men about them jumping the woman's call, then they will go down a couple of notches. I said, you've got to turn around, tell the male officer shows up on the scene, leave a handling. That establishes their position as a knowledgeable, competent, fully commissioned police officer. You don't let somebody else fight the damage. Mindy Connie, I was on the car one night as a lieutenant, and I heard her make the traffic stop. She was alone then. And so I started over that way, and by the time I got there, she's got a person bigger than I am, who's obviously drunk. She's got him by the elbow, and she's walking into the car. Mindy was about that. And I rolled on the window, and I can hear her going, what do you think your mother would say? Would you like your family to see what's going on here? Would you like your mother to see you sitting in the back of my car? Get in that car. I went up to her after and secured the car and I said, Mindy, we didn't teach you that in this academy. Light bulb. And she said, there's a lot of things we know you didn't teach us in this academy. So, it goes on and on, but is it solved today in the police department? No. Is it better? Yes. And I think the tips we're going to talk about, some of the stuff you heard this morning comes into play.
Yes. Well, I've been asked to talk about some of the stereotypes that women have about men as it relates to the workplace, and some of you may want to jot some of these down. And it's not so much that some of these aren't true, some of the stereotypes in some ways, but they also hold us back. And one of the things that, when Roger and I talked about this initially, one of the quotes we had, which was, we are not the same, but we are equal. And I think that is one of the things that we're looking for in workplace environments. So, this comes from 16 different studies about stereotypes and things that women have to contend with men in the workplace. So on occasion, men might be just a bit bossy, just a bit aggressive, and order people around. And what that does to the workplace is it makes it a place where sometimes females feel intimidated. Even if they're in charge, even if they have a title, it's very easy for men to take over things. We sometimes think that you're not civil, that you don't remember pleases and thank yous. I'm looking in the front row. This isn't exactly a workplace environment story, but Bert and I were putting in a window at our first house when we were married, and it was the kind that stuck out. You could put plants in it. We were doing this together, this little wonderful gender moment, and Bert is holding the window, and I'm holding the window. And he's telling me and bossing me what to do, and I completely let go of the window, and I said, no pleases, no thank yous, you may do it yourself. She was left holding the window. Good job, honey. He came back and went, please.
But we're all the same, remember?
Exactly. Sometimes we wish men would connect better, take the moment to say good morning, or say, how's your job going? And we really appreciate the men who do that. We would love it for men to be better listeners, and you've gotten feedback about that. How many men in this room, raise your hand, have gotten feedback about we'd like you to listen better? Raise your hand. All the men who are here.
How many on a daily basis?
And that's essential in the workplace, because oftentimes we use more words. On a daily basis, women use 20,000 words to the male speaking 7,000. So sometimes you have to listen, and listen a lot. So that's one of the stereotypes we have. please do not use honey, sweetie, sugar plum when you're addressing me. It tends to degrade me as a person, and as I said to one male colleague sometime back, the only male on the planet who gets to call me honey is my husband. And I certainly wouldn't do that, and so that causes issues. Sometimes men only have one style, and they have a tough time adjusting that. As I say to my son, who's a police officer, please take the badge off your shorts, go back outside, and come back in again like a human being. Sometimes male language is a bit abrasive, and it comes in an order, do this, do that, and we really love to have it be said in a more civil way. Sometimes men try to fix things and we only want them to listen. And sometimes women are at the table and still not included. There's a scene in Zero Dark 30 where this woman is pursuing Osama bin Laden, and all of these CIA and FBI people are at the table, and they're sitting in the back just like the women in the police department. And they don't even think to include her. And finally someone says, one of the men says, is there anyone here who thinks we can actually get Osama bin Laden, and who stands up as she does? And she finds her voice. So if both genders can let each gender have their own voice, then we start to bridge the gap. And any stereotypes for men to women that you'd like to mention? No, you're good. Yes, you do.
They're the same. The stereotypes that I don't think they've changed in years and years and years.
Not much.
And when they, let's not take when the first came to us, let's fast forward a few years, say 10 years, and see if anything's changed. Now today, the list isn't exactly the same, but we're in the mid-90s here. Women are weak. Women are emotional. Women are technically incompetent. There's a lot of gear you have to operate as a police officer. Now these are stereotypes. These are the beliefs of the male officers. Women never get to the point. When you go through a domestic violence situation, in the old days, one of you has to leave and go spend the night someplace else, and come back and beat each other up another day. We got things to do, so split up. Nowadays, somebody's going to go to jail, but there's a lot of talking that goes on, and we get training on how to deal with children on site too. And when one of the women officers stands in that scene, it goes entirely different. The male officer's empathy is about a minute and a half. And then they're ready to take someone to jail and go on to the next call. The woman officer will sit there and learn a whole lot about the situation, make referrals and resource advice to either both parties for counseling and other advocacy type groups, and then she'll take somebody to jail. And by that time, the person said, well, I guess I have to go to jail. Off they go. With the male officer, 50% of the time, domestic, somebody's going to end up in a fight. They should take action quicker. And this one is more recent. The criticism of the male officer, stop trying to be like a man. And that I explain this way, that this is a clue that there's still a problem. Because if the men are still dominating, and the women think that the only way to succeed is to be like them, they try to. Forgetting all of the differences that are much stronger, that work much better the way they have than what the men are doing. And then the men are going, wait a minute, you can't talk like that, you can't act like that, that's my job. And so this is something I saw just as I was leaving the force.
We're going to talk about tips that we would leave with you for the workplace, and I'm going to talk about tips for women, and Roger's going to talk about tips for men. Ladies, when you present yourself, do not be apologetic. You have credentials, put them out there. Don't answer a question with, I'm probably wrong about this. I know that for many of us, it's not ingrained to toot our own horn, but it doesn't mean you're conceited to do that. When you leave the community colleges in Spokane with a degree, with credentials, You ought to be proud of those and be able to speak to them because they hold their own in any company. You've got the best bang for your buck at this school than any place you could go. So you have nothing to be apologetic for. So enter a room, look men eye to eye, and stick up for yourselves when that's appropriate. So that's tip number 1 for women. I think the second thing is, take the drama and the gossip and put it in the garbage can. Because oftentimes, I can say this about my own gender, we get all wrapped up in all the stories and people know everything about everybody. And that sometimes really hurts the workplace. So we have what we call a no complaining rule in the class that Amy and I teach. And what that means is you only make a complaint to a person who can do something directly to solve it. So you're not going around going wah, wah, wah about this and wah, wah, wah about that. It feeds into a stereotype about women being too emotional. The third thing is there's nothing wrong with your emotions. There's still a double standard. Hillary Clinton was in front of a United States Senate panel, and one of the Republican senators turned to her and said, you know, on your watch, Secretary of State Clinton, this embassy was bombed and we lost Americans, and it's your fault. Your fault that these people were killed. And she paused, and during that pause, a lone tear came down her cheek. And the media picked up on, you see how weak she was? You see how she cried? And when President Obama got up and spoke about the shootings of those magnificent children in Newtown, and a tear came down his cheek, what the press said was, look how empathic he is. You see how that's a double standard? Many of us are more emotional, and we don't need to bleed those emotions all over. We need to know when to be businesslike and when to be expressive is what our emotions are. So the third tip that I want to give to women is to know what you bring to any workplace. We often bring the heart, we often bring the flowers, we often bring the food, we often bring the coffee, and we bring hospitality to workplaces that would be absolutely, desolately cold without that. It doesn't mean men can't do those things, but it's very natural for lots of us. It doesn't mean that you're diminished because you have concern and ability to connect with the people that you work with. So those are 3 tips for women. Any tips for men?
Well, Amy, as usual, you've changed the order here. No.
Oh,
Amy does that to me all the
Oh,
time.
I see.
So are we combining these tips? and
Yes,
skills?
we've only got about 5 minutes.
Okay. What I saw in the strengths in the women police officers is that men officers are finally starting to learn, because it makes the job go through. That job is even harder today than it was when I was running the streets. The scrutiny, the social medias, the cultural issues are much, much more complex. So, I'm going to give you 3 communications tips in a minute, but here's what men can learn in the police department. And I think this could apply to any workplace. Men should learn patience. We are terribly impatient bunch. Communication skills. Men don't just, you said it, men just don't talk. We talk at a certain point and then it's time to do something. Even if we have enough facts, even if we don't have enough information to act properly. It's been a minute and a half, so I have to do something. Empathy, we talk about emotions. This is one of those areas where I hate to see the woman police officers start acting like a man and lose the empathy. The empathy became one of those trust issues. The community knows that police officers care. They didn't learn it from the male police officers. They learned it from our women police officers, who took longer at a site to make sure that they learned everything, to make sure that they helped as much as possible. Attention to detail. You would think that in a just the facts type of world, that wouldn't even have to be talked about. But because of our impatience, like I said, we'll get to a point and we'll move on without getting all of the details. Women have a better sense of, we don't have all the information. It's not time to act. Teamwork. Believe it or not, you would think, well, officers are definitely team-oriented. No, they're not. You're trained to go by yourself to scenes and control it until other individual officers come. And then you might, depending on what you're dealing with, form into teams. But from the outset, you're not taught to team. With our women police officers, when I was a training sergeant in the academy, I saw immediately their ability to be supportive and to offer help to anybody else in their immediate area. They just did it naturally. My big 3 tips, and I think this applies to anything. I took a bunch of communication classes as I started to go up the ranks because I could see that I was going to deal with a lot of different people. It wasn't just go to work, deal with the bad guy, or put in jail. I had to talk to citizens. I had to talk to public groups. I took a speech class from somebody named Salisbury. Back in the 70s. She was about 12. And I'm thinking, this is pretty stupid. But that speech class, the multicultural classes I took at Eastern, every place I could take a communication class, I did it. And then, of course, this is my wife every single day. I would say the #1 tip is wherever you can take a communications class, take it. OMG and LOL is not communication. You must someday sit in front of a boss and try to sell them that you want this job. And you're not going to do it with Twitter and email and texting. It's got to be face to face, and you've got to know how to speak. You might want to convince somebody someday not to kill you. You've got to learn how to speak. Try to understand and accept the differences as strengths. I learned that by observation, and I totally believe it. If I see something that I think is different, I'll say, how can we use that? And lastly, be constantly respectful. You won't use offensive language, you won't harass, you won't inadvertently or you won't touch inappropriately if you're always respectful.